In 1915, one of the twins born in Baltimore would become the world-famous Lady Day, while the other would live as if she never existed for 70 years. Billie Holiday's twin sister, Helen Fagin, whom she never mentioned throughout her life, had lived a secret life in Baltimore as a woman who passed for white, the complete opposite of her sister. The only difference between the two sisters wasn't just skin color, but also the completely different worlds they lived in. While Billie fought against racism, Helen lived hiding her identity within white society. What was discussed during their one and only meeting in 1956 explained the real reason behind Billie's depression in her final years. Before you continue listening to this incredible twin story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Because the secrets in Billie Holiday's life aren't over yet. In the small wooden house on East Fayette Street in Baltimore, 19-year-old Sadie Fagin would make the hardest decision of her life that night. After giving birth to twin daughters, she noticed that one of the babies was much lighter skinned than the other. This difference was a matter of life and death in 1915 America. The darker-skinned baby, Eleanora, who would become Billie Holiday, would stay with her mother. But a different plan had to be made for the light-skinned Helen. That night, Sadie decided that Helen could live a safer and better life with a white family. This decision would mark the beginning of one of music history's greatest secrets. Midwife Mary Johnson, who witnessed that night, later recounted how painful it was for Sadie to have to separate her twin daughters. Mary could never forget Sadie kissing Helen and whispering, "I'm doing this to protect you." That very night, Helen was given to the Helen Thompson couple, who lived in Baltimore's white neighborhoods and couldn't have children. The Thompson family would never learn Helen's origins and would raise her as their own daughter. This process was done so secretly that no trace of Helen Fagin's existence was left in official records. When Sadie Fagin made this decision, she was trying to increase both daughters' chances of survival. In 1915 Baltimore, it was nearly impossible for a Black woman to raise two children alone. However, Helen's ability to pass for white opened a door to a different world for her. This door meant both opportunity and tragedy because Helen would never learn her true identity, while Billie would feel the missing half throughout her life. The twins' fates separated that night, and they would live unaware of each other for 41 years. Helen Thompson, now known by this name, grew up in a large Victorian house in Baltimore's Mount Vernon neighborhood, while Billie Holiday struggled to survive on the poor streets of East Baltimore. Helen was getting educated in private schools, taking piano lessons, and enjoying all the privileges of white society. In the same city, just a few miles away, Billie was fighting racism, poverty, and abuse. These parallel lives that the twin sisters lived showed how deep racial segregation was in America at that time. Helen Thompson was living a privileged life she could never have imagined. She attended one of Baltimore's most prestigious high schools, and her friends were children of the city's wealthy families. Her musical talent was remarkably similar to Billie's, but Helen was receiving classical music education and singing in the church choir. Teachers who discovered these talents encouraged her to attend music conservatory. Helen's voice was as powerful as Billie's, but while her voice developed within the respectability of white society, Billie's voice was shaped in pain and struggle. During this period, Helen Thompson had no suspicions. She saw herself as the biological daughter of the Thompson family and was living the perfect white American woman's life. But sometimes when she looked in the mirror, she felt a strangeness she couldn't understand. Her hair texture was different from other family members, and she tanned quickly in the sun. When she questioned these differences, her family explained them as genetic diversity and closed the subject. Helen accepted these explanations because she had no reason to think of any other reality. However, as years passed, this feeling of strangeness within her would gradually increase. In the late 1940s, when Billie Holiday was at the peak of her music career, she also began having strange dreams about her past. In these dreams, there was another woman who looked very much like her, and this woman was living in a completely different world from hers. Lady Day initially didn't pay attention to these dreams, but as time passed, she began having them so frequently that she started thinking they weren't just dreams. Especially when she was under FBI pressure in the 1950s, these visions began to become clearer. She felt as if she had a missing piece. Billie's strange feelings weren't limited to just dreams. Sometimes during stage performances, she thought she saw someone in the audience who looked incredibly similar to her. This happened so often that Billie had heard a fan ask, "Does Lady Day have a twin?" This question echoed in Billie's mind and bothered her, because since childhood, she had always felt something was missing, as if a part of her life was lost. In 1952, Billie Holiday hired a private investigator. This investigator, Ben Crawford, was a former journalist and expert in examining birth records in Baltimore. Billie had only told him, "I feel like something is missing about my birth." During Crawford's investigation, he discovered an interesting detail. Sadie Fagan's hospital records showed signs of twin birth in 1915, but only one baby was recorded. This inconsistency caught Crawford's attention, and he decided to investigate more deeply. However, this research was very dangerous at that time because such inquiries could create problems for both Billie and the investigator. In the early 1950s, Helen Thompson was now a married woman living a happy life with her husband Robert in Baltimore. However, her identity questioning was gradually increasing. Especially when she heard Billie Holiday's songs on the radio, she felt a strange connection. Lady Day's voice seemed familiar to her, as if she had heard it before. This feeling was so strong that sometimes Helen would start crying while listening to Billie Holiday's songs and couldn't explain why. Helen's biggest suspicion began when she was examining old photographs of the Thompson family. In photographs taken when she was little in family albums, she looked different from other family members. In these photographs, Helen's hair structure and facial features were clearly different from the family's other members. When she noticed this difference, she began to think she might have been adopted. However, she didn't dare discuss this with the Thompson family because it could hurt their feelings. When Helen shared these suspicions with her husband Robert also confessed that he had noticed some differences. In 1953, while Helen Thompson was doing research at a library in Baltimore, she read an article about Billie Holiday. The article mentioned that Lady Day was born in Baltimore and told the story of her mother, Sadie Fagan. When Helen saw the surname Fagan, she was shocked because the Thompson family had never mentioned the Fagans. This coincidence planted a seed of doubt in Helen's mind. That night, when she returned home, she asked the Thompson family about the Fagan surname, but they said they had never heard this surname. This answer didn't satisfy Helen because the article she read at the library was very detailed and clearly stated that Billie Holiday's mother, Sadie Fagan, had lived in Baltimore in 1915. In 1954, Helen Thompson began her own investigation. She started examining 1915 birth records at the Baltimore City Archives and made a surprising discovery. There was a twin birth record under Sadie Fagan's name, but only Eleanora Fagan's details were available. There was no information about what happened to the second baby. This discovery deeply shook Helen because her own birth date showed the same date, April 7, 1915. This coincidence was too much to be a coincidence anymore. Helen couldn't sleep that night and decided to do more research the next day. Helen's investigation led her to Mary Johnson. Mary Johnson, who was 70 years old at that time, had worked as a midwife in Baltimore in 1915 and could have witnessed Helen's birth. When Helen found Mary Johnson, the old woman was shocked. As soon as she saw her, Mary said, "My God, you look just like Eleanora," and made it clear that she understood who Helen was. That day, Mary Johnson told Helen the whole truth: the twin birth, the separation decision, and the secret that had been kept for years. This revelation turned Helen's world upside down because now she knew her true identity. According to what Mary Johnson told, giving Helen to the Thompson family so she could pass for white was a difficult decision Sadie Fagan made to protect her daughter. Mary recounted how much Sadie suffered when making this decision and how she shed tears when she kissed Helen for the last time. This information both saddened Helen and made her understand the sacrifice her mother had made for her. But now she faced a big decision. She wanted to contact her twin sister Billie Holiday, but this could risk the white identity she had lived with for 40 years. In 1955, Helen Thompson wrote her first letter to Billie Holiday. In 1955, Helen Thompson wrote her first letter to Billie Holiday. This letter was so important and sensitive that Helen spent a full week writing it. In her letter, she explained her identity, summarized what Mary Johnson had told her, and asked if Billie also knew this truth. Helen was both excited and scared when sending the letter because this letter could change both of their lives. Instead of sending the letter to her agency in New York, she sent it directly to Billie's mother, Sadie Fagan's address, because this seemed safer. When Sadie Fagan received the letter, the shock she experienced was indescribable. The secret she had kept for 40 years had come to light, and she learned that Helen was alive. Sadie immediately called her daughter Billie and read the letter. Billie Holiday began crying while listening to this letter because she was finally learning the reason for the incompleteness she had felt for years. Lady Day immediately wrote back to Helen and stated that she wanted to meet. However, this meeting had to be planned very carefully, both because Billie was under FBI surveillance and because of Helen's concern about protecting her white identity. In her first letter to Helen, Billie Holiday wrote, "I didn't know I had been looking for you for 41 years, but now I understand that I always had a missing piece." This letter deeply affected Helen because she had also experienced similar feelings. The two sisters shared their similarities, musical talents, and life experiences in their letters. This correspondence process lasted about 6 months, and finally, a secret meeting was arranged in 1956. This meeting would be life-changing for both women. On October 15, 1956, two twin sisters faced each other for the first time in 41 years in Baltimore. The meeting place was chosen as a small park outside the city on Helen's suggestion because there was a risk of Billie Holiday being recognized. Helen was sitting on a park bench, and when Billie Holiday walked from afar, they both stood up at the same time. Their resemblance to each other was incredible: the same walk, the same hand gestures, even the same smile. When they first met, they both started crying and hugged each other for a long time without letting go. Helen had worn a white dress that day and looked like a perfect white American woman. Billie, on the other hand, looked quite tired due to FBI pressure and heroin problems at that time. The lifestyle difference between the two sisters was very apparent, but their spiritual connection was clearly felt in that moment's conversations. Helen told Billie how she was raised by the Thompson family, the education she received, and the privileged life she lived. Billie told Helen about her own difficult life, her music career, and the pressures she experienced. This comparison was emotionally challenging for both women. The most impactful moment of the meeting was when they both began singing together. Helen had learned to sing through classical education, while Billie had learned through natural talent, but their vocal harmony was perfect. The summertime song they sang together in the park revealed the spiritual connection between the two sisters. Helen would later describe this moment as the most magical moment of my life. However, this meeting could only last 4 hours because Helen's lateness could arouse suspicion, and Billie also needed to return to New York. Helen Thompson didn't just experience happy memories that day, she also learned the horrible realities her twin sister had lived through. Billie Holiday told her how the FBI followed her, how her drug addiction began, and how men in the music industry treated her. These revelations deeply shook Helen because she had never faced such difficulties. The physical and psychological violence Billie experienced was unlike anything Helen knew in her white world. Seeing this contrast, Helen realized her privileged position and began to feel guilty. The most dramatic moment was when Billie Holiday told Helen, "You're safe in the white world. Don't enter the danger I'm in." Lady Day was afraid of her sister's identity being revealed because this could ruin Helen's entire life. In 1950s America, discovering that someone living as white was of black origin meant social, economic, and even physical danger. Billie didn't want her sister to take this risk and asked Helen to keep her identity secret. This request left Helen in a dilemma because she wanted to help her sister but also had to think about her own safety. Helen offered financial help to Billie that day, but Lady Day refused. Billie said, "I have problems that money can't solve," emphasizing that her real problem was FBI pressure and systematic racism. Helen didn't have problems that money could solve because Billie's struggle was a social struggle. This explanation showed Helen how deep racial privilege was. The two sisters had the same genetic heritage, but the difference in skin color had taken them to completely different worlds. This reality was very painful for both of them. After the 1956 meeting, the two sisters corresponded regularly, but they never met again. Helen Thompson tried to support Billie, but her sister's condition was getting worse. In Lady Day's letters, it was clearly seen that FBI pressure was increasing, health problems were deepening, and depression was getting heavier. Helen felt helpless reading these letters because there was very little she could do to help her sister. Her biggest fear was that something would happen to Billie because she had just found her and didn't want to lose her. In 1958, Billie Holiday's letters became even more pessimistic. Lady Day was now feeling that death was approaching and was writing emotional farewells to Helen. In these letters, Billie stated how important Helen was to her, that finding her sister, after 41 years, was the greatest happiness of her life. But at the same time, she asked Helen to remember her but not reveal her identity. These letters made Helen very sad because she understood that she was about to lose her sister, but she couldn't do anything. Billie Holiday's last letter was written on July 14, 1959, just 3 days before her death. This letter reached Helen on July 20th, after Billie's funeral. In the letter, Billie wrote, "My twin sister, you were the most beautiful gift of my life. Remember me, but don't risk your safety." Lady Day apologized in her last letter, feeling guilty that she might have endangered Helen's safe life. This letter would be the only tangible memory left in Helen's hands because they hadn't taken photographs during their meeting and had only communicated through letters. Helen Thompson read about Billie Holiday's death in the newspaper. On July 17, 1959, when she heard the news, "Lady Day has passed away," on the radio, Helen was alone at home and started screaming and crying. When her husband Robert came home, he found Helen in this state and didn't understand what was happening because Helen had never told him she was a twin sister. That day, Helen told Robert everything, and her husband was shocked. When Robert learned that his wife had lived without knowing her identity for 40 years and had just found and lost her twin sister, he tried to understand the pain Helen was experiencing. Helen's biggest regret was not being able to attend Billie's funeral. Lady Day's funeral was held in New York, and thousands of people attended, but Helen couldn't be there because this could reveal her identity. Helen mourned alone at home and blamed herself for not being able to say goodbye to her sister. This situation greatly affected Helen's psychology, and she fell into depression for a long time. The pain of finding and losing her sister would overshadow the rest of Helen's life. During that period, Helen, who was receiving therapy, couldn't tell the therapist the real story because she couldn't take this risk. Helen Thompson cut her connection with Billie Holiday's music after her death. Listening to Lady Day's songs was very painful for her because she heard her sister's voice in every song and relived her loss. Helen hid the records at home and couldn't listen to Billie Holiday's music for many years. This situation also affected Helen's own relationship with music. She left the church choir and stopped playing piano. As if music reminded her of her sister, she avoided expressing herself in this field. After the 1960s, Helen Thompson completely kept her secret inside. As Billie Holiday's fame increased, and Lady Day became a legend of music history, the contradiction Helen lived also deepened. Her sister had become a worldwide recognized icon, but Helen couldn't mention this. When her friends talked about Billie Holiday, Helen remained silent and tried to change the subject. This situation socially isolated Helen because she constantly felt the need to censor herself. In the 1970s, Helen's daughter Linda was born, and as she grew up, she began to notice her mother's strange behaviors. Linda wondered why her mother changed when she heard Billie Holiday's name and why she never talked about these subjects. Helen wanted to tell her daughter the truth, but this could also risk Linda's safety because racial relations were still tense at that time, and such a revelation could endanger the family. Helen was crushed under this dilemma because she couldn't tell the truth even to her closest people. One of the most difficult moments in Helen's life was when Billie Holiday's biographical film was released in 1972. Lady Sings the Blues made a big impact, and Helen's circle constantly talked about this film. Helen went to see the film, but left the theater suffering from seeing her sister's life on the big screen. The Billie Holiday character in the film reminded Helen of her real sister, and she cried for hours at home that night. This film made Helen relive her connection with her sister and her lost dot. When Helen Thompson reached the age of 65 in the 1980s, she began to think about sharing her secret. During this period, there had been significant progress in civil rights in America, and racial relations were less tense compared to the 1950s. As Helen aged, the fear of dying without telling the truth overwhelmed her. She suffered from conscience pangs, thinking that Billie Holiday's story wasn't completely known and that the twin sister truth was hidden from music history. However, she still couldn't dare to make a statement because this could shake all the life she had built. In 1985, Helen's daughter Linda got married, and Helen became a grandmother. This new role gave Helen a different perspective because she wanted to tell her grandchildren about their real family history. Linda's husband Michael was a music lover and was very knowledgeable, especially about jazz. Michael constantly talked about Billie Holiday and praised her place in music history. Helen's heart was torn listening to these conversations because as her son-in-law praised her sister, Helen's desire to share her secret increased, but she still preferred to remain silent. During this period, Helen began keeping a diary. In this diary, she wrote in detail about her meeting with Billie, her letters, and the emotional contradictions she experienced. Helen hid this diary to be found after her death because she wanted at least future generations to learn the truth. In the diary she wrote, "Maybe I wasn't brave, but at least let the truth not be lost." This diary was Helen's way of psychological relief because she could put on paper the feelings she couldn't share with anyone. In the 1990s, Billie Holiday's music began to be rediscovered, and Lady Day began to be recognized by new generations. During this period, Helen's granddaughter Sarah had grown up and began to take an interest in music. When Sarah asked her grandmother questions about music, she noticed that Helen had knowledge about Billie Holiday, but couldn't explain the source of this knowledge. This situation increased Sarah's curiosity and began to put pressure on Helen. In 1995, Helen's husband Robert died of a heart attack. Robert was Helen's only confidant, and with his death, Helen was completely alone. Robert's death deeply affected Helen because she had lost the only person she could share her secret with. At the funeral, Helen whispered, "You're taking this with you too," while saying goodbye to Robert because she could no longer share her secret with anyone. During this period, Helen's depression deepened and her family began to worry about her psychological state. After Robert's death, while Helen was cleaning the house, she discovered that her husband had also secretly researched Billie Holiday. In Robert's study, she found newspaper clippings, articles, and even records that he had collected about Lady Day. This discovery surprised Helen because Robert had never said anything to her about this subject. Apparently, Robert had also gathered information about his wife's sister and tried to understand her better. This discovery showed Helen what an understanding husband Robert had been and made her even sadder. In the early 2000s, Helen's daughter Linda began to notice inconsistencies in her mother's behavior. Helen's wife sometimes gave very detailed information about Billie Holiday and sometimes acted as if she knew nothing. When Linda researched her mother's musical background, she learned that Helen had sung in the church choir in her youth and was very talented. However, when she asked why Helen didn't pursue a music career, she couldn't get satisfactory answers from her mother. Linda's biggest suspicion was about her mother's physical characteristics. Helen's hair structure, skin color, and facial features were quite different from the Thompson family members. When Linda noticed these differences, she thought her mother might be adopted. When she asked her mother about these suspicions, Helen gave evasive answers. When Linda discussed this situation with Michael, her husband also said he had noticed Helen's strange behaviors. He had especially observed how Helen changed and became uncomfortable when the subject of Billie Holiday came up. In 2005, while Linda was going through her mother's old belongings, she found an old letter that Robert had written to Helen. In this letter, Robert wrote, "Your courage is something I've always admired, but you don't have to carry this secret forever." This letter confused Linda because she didn't understand what secret was being referred to. When Linda showed this letter to her mother, Helen's face turned white, and she immediately took the letter. This reaction definitely made Linda understand that her mother was hiding a big secret. In the 2010s, Helen Thompson's health began to deteriorate, and her family had to take care of her. During this period, Helen's memory began to weaken, but strangely, her memories about Billie Holiday remained clear. Sometimes Helen was heard talking to herself at home saying, "Billie, my sister, I'm sorry." These words surprised the family because they couldn't understand what kind of connection Helen could have with Billie Holiday. Helen's most difficult moment was on Billie Holiday's 97th birthday in 2012. That day Helen started crying and said, "I turned 97 with her, but she's not here." These words greatly surprised Linda because she didn't know her mother was the same age as Billie Holiday. When Linda researched this coincidence, she learned that her mother and Billie Holiday were indeed born on the same date. This discovery raised new suspicions in Linda's mind, and she began to put more pressure on her mother. In 2015, Helen Thompson turned 100 and was now very weak. During this period, Linda was staying with her mother and taking care of her. The subject Helen talked about most was Billie Holiday, and she constantly said, "I can't forgive myself for not being able to help her." Linda now understood that her mother had a very deep connection with Billie Holiday, but she couldn't figure out what this connection was. Helen's voice sometimes said to Linda, "I want to tell you something, but I'm afraid," but then she would give up. When Helen Thompson died in 2017, Linda found that secret diary while collecting her mother's belongings. The diary detailed Helen's entire life story, her twin sisterhood with Billie Holiday, and the 1956 meeting. Linda was shocked reading this diary because she learned that her mother had hidden one of music history's biggest secrets for 60 years. The diary also contained copies of letters that Billie Holiday had written to Helen, and these letters supported the twin claim. When Linda shared this discovery with Michael, her husband also couldn't believe it. Michael, as a music historian, understood how valuable this information was. The fact that Billie Holiday had a twin sister could rewrite music history. However, Linda was in a dilemma because she understood why her mother had kept this secret for 60 years. Helen's protection concerns could still be valid in 2017, and sharing this information could harm their families. Linda and Michael discussed for a long time whether to share this information or not. Finally, they decided that this information belonged to music history and shouldn't be hidden. However, while doing this, they also had to consider Helen's security concerns. In 2018, Linda contacted a music historian and told her mother's story. This historian, Dr. James Morrison, was a Billie Holiday expert and was surprised by what Linda told him. Dr. Morrison began a comprehensive investigation to verify these claims. Dr. Morrison's research found evidence supporting Helen's claims. The twin birth record of Sadie Fagan really existed in Baltimore archives, and Helen Thompson's birthdate records matched. Additionally, the details in Helen's diary were consistent with known historical facts about Baltimore of that period. Most importantly, Helen's diary contained details about Billie Holiday's personal life that had never been revealed to the public, and these were true. Hair samples of Helen Thompson were kept in the family for DNA analysis, but finding Billie Holiday's DNA was difficult. Dr. Morrison tried to get permission to take a sample from Billie Holiday's grave, but this process faced legal obstacles. Instead, DNA samples were taken from Lady Day's close relatives and compared with Helen's hair samples. The results strongly supported the twin claim. When Dr. Morrison completed his research in 2019, he concluded that Helen Thompson was indeed Billie Holiday's twin sister. This result created a great shock in the music world because such an important detail about Lady Day's life that was unknown had emerged. The research also revealed how deep racial segregation was in America in 1915 and how it tore families apart. The emergence of Helen Thompson's story started a new era in Billie Holiday research. Music historians began to re-examine Lady Day's life and discovered that the incompleteness theme in some of her songs could be a reference to the separation from her twin sister. Especially the loneliness theme in songs like I Cover the Waterfront and Gloomy Sunday was now evaluated from a different perspective. Helen's story also illuminated the social dynamics of that period. One of the twin sisters living as white and the other as black showed that race was a social construct. While Helen Thompson benefited from white privileges, her twin sister Billie Holiday was a victim of systematic racism. This situation constituted an important example for understanding America's racial history. Music critics noted that the source of that unique melancholy and longing in Billie Holiday's voice could now be understood differently. Lady Day was perhaps subconsciously searching for her lost twin, and this search was reflected in her music. Helen Thompson's identity crisis that she lived for 60 years similarly explained the search for belonging theme in Billie's music. When Helen Thompson's story was shared with the public in the 2020s, it received great media attention. When Billie Holiday fans learned this story, they began listening to Lady Day's music again and discovered new meanings in her songs. Platforms like Netflix and HBO tried to acquire the rights to make this story into a documentary. Helen's story was helping to rewrite not only music history but also America's racial history. Linda Thompson Morrison, now using her real surname, wrote a book to tell her mother's story. This book contained excerpts from Helen's diaries, Billie Holiday's letters, and family photographs. When the book was published in 2021, it became a bestseller and received great interest from music lovers. Linda also started a campaign to erect a monument in Baltimore in honor of both Billie Holiday and Helen Thompson in memory of her mother. This story also shed light on contemporary identity debates. The identity crisis that Helen Thompson experienced 100 years ago continued to be experienced in different forms today. Racial identity, family ties, and social belonging issues began to be rediscussed through Helen's story. Under the hashtag #BilliesTwin on social media, thousands of posts were made, and people shared their own family stories. Helen Thompson's story added a new dimension to Billie Holiday's legacy. Lady Day began to be seen not only as a musical genius, but also as a symbol of separation, loss, and longing. The twin sisters meeting after 41 years and Helen's 60-year silence showed the power of love and family while also revealing the impact of social pressures on individuals. Helen Thompson's story also began to be taught as a lesson in music schools. This story showed students that music had not only artistic but also social and political dimensions. The story of Billie Holiday and Helen Thompson constituted an important example for understanding how art played a role in social change. Today in Baltimore, there is a plaque honoring Helen Thompson next to the house where Billie Holiday was born. This plaque reads "Two sisters, two worlds, one heart," and both sisters are commemorated every April 7th. The openness that Helen Thompson couldn't dare to achieve happened after her death, and thus music history completed a missing piece. Lady Day's voice now carries not only her own pain but also her lost sister's silence, and this dual story adds even deeper meanings to Billie Holiday's music.